In this week's drive, the hills are alive to the sound of motors. We take a long slide to nowhere, collect some soil samples and feel the pain in Spain, and start an all-Italian affair. All this and more in this week's Drive. The World Rally Championship is halfway through, and Peugeot currently have 2 drivers in the top 3 in the championship. Englishman Richard Burns leads the title chase by 7 points from Finn Marcus Grönholm, but Spaniard Carlos Sainz is second, 5 points behind the Brit in his Citroën. All 3 have tasted world champion status, with Grönholm the reigning champion. Critics claim that Burns hasn't yet pushed himself to the limit, as he hasn't won a single event since joining Peugeot at the start of the 2002 season, although he's been in the points at every event so far this year. The Englishman is no doubt casting nervous glances over his shoulder as Grönholm continues his pursuit of the championship lead. But the Peugeot, once dominant in the series, has been caught up by its rivals and has suffered some mechanical failures. Grönholm retired early in the Greek round.
It's not as fragile as it used to be. Whether it's quite strong enough to beat the Fords and the Subarus, we're not quite sure.
Looking ahead to some of the rockier rallies, Burns said that although crews can take 2 spare wheels in case of punctures on the rougher courses, they try to rely on special tyre filling mousse technology.
Generally, you try not to take 2 spares if you can get away with it, because it's obviously a lot of extra weight. Normally with the mousse system that we have inside the tyres, then you can get away. Even if you start a stage with a puncture, then that mousse will fill the tyre. So even if I've certainly started stages in the past with 3 punctures, and you don't really notice it so much. But yeah, you have to drive a little bit considering the road.
While Burns has yet to break his duck for Peugeot, Grönholm has won 3 rallies this year. However, the World Champs season has not been without driver errors, including damaging his suspension in Monte Carlo and Argentina and rolling his 206 in New Zealand. Burns therefore believes consistency will be the key to the championship. Leading without scoring a win so far this year, Burns is trailed by 3 winners, Martin claiming his first in Greece. Sainz eclipses his British teammate McRae, also a former world champion. Peugeot would like to see more daylight between them and French rivals Citroën, although the new Ford would seem to be coming good at last. Overlooking the Nürburgring is the Nürburg Castle, built about 850 years ago, destroyed in 1689 and rebuilt after the 30 Years' War. Nowadays, the only battles in the area are fought out on the track, which has also seen many changes. Originally built in 1927, the track has been shortened to just 5 kilometers to meet the needs of modern racing. The 21-kilometer Nordschleife, or Northern Loop, still exists and is used by the car industry, with open days for drivers and riders to play at being racers. The ring is the spiritual home of German racing, scene of monumental tussles between pre-war legends like Rosemeyer, Stuck and von Brautich, and their mighty Mercedes and auto unions. But after some horror crashes and some deaths, Formula One drivers refused to race at the ring, where long laps and poor access meant help could be a long time coming.
As we can see here, instead of a chicane at the end of the long start and finish straight, there is a right-hand corner which also drops sharply downhill. It's not easy to find the apex point here, but it's an ideal section for overtaking. The end of the corner can be very tight though.
For the Williams, BMW and McLaren Mercedes teams, success in the German Grand Prix is especially important, as the 2 engine suppliers seek to win the hometown fight for superiority. The BMW is supposedly the more powerful engine in Formula One, and the Mercedes will be driving an all-new McLaren, so each have a possible advantage. Although Ferrari's German reigning world champion driver, Michael Schumacher, will be keen to ride his Italian prancing horse to another victory at home. Williams drivers Juan Pablo Montoya and Michael's brother Ralph use simulators to give themselves a refresher course on the track's layout, although nothing can prepare them for the real thing.
Every track has got its small characteristic, you know, some are fast, some are slow, some are bumpy, some are smooth, some, yeah, you use a lot of curves, some you don't. So it's just, you know, the thing, you know, the tires changes from race to race, you know, the car is changing through all the year, and the setup changes from race to race, so, you know, it's just, evolve through the year as the races go on.
To drivers capable of lapping consistently as fast as they do, driving the simulator is more relaxing than real. But in reality, the Nürburgring is capable of many things, including abrupt weather changes. The track has been exciting drivers since 1927 and will continue to. By way of proof, 200,000 fans recently packed into the famous track for this year's 24-hour endurance race. Two new touring cars, the Audi TTR and the Opel Astra V8 Coupe, have been revelations in the DTM Championship this season, and much was expected of them. For some, the race was over almost before it started. However, a 24-hour endurance race is different to a sprint race, and the Porsche and BMW factory teams, backed by experienced pit crews, were tipped to dominate the event. But the Audi team of Karl Wendlinger, Christian Abt, Chris Nissen and Marco Werner confounded the predictions, opening an early lead. For some cars, however, the end would come sooner than expected. One of the Opels was involved in this racing incident as a slower car moved over and tapped the Astra right out of the race. Pit stops would prove to be crucial, especially for the leading team. Despite dominating the first half of the race and leading into the early hours of Sunday, the Audi suffered a slow stop and driver change, surrendering the lead to the Opel of Manuel Reuter, Timo Scheider, Marcel Thiemann and Volker Streichek. As day broke on Sunday, the demanding Nordschleifer claimed another victim. A problem with the engine overnight had been followed by gearbox trouble as Marco Werner tried to hold on to the lead. The final blow for the Audi team came with a puncture. The driver had to limp slowly back to the pits for a 40-minute stop to replace the hub and brakes. It was the chance the Opel had been waiting for. They grabbed the lead, and despite pressure from the recovered Audi, Manuel Reuter brought the Opel home after 24 hours and 7 minutes of racing, 5 laps ahead of the Audi. It sparked jubilant celebration from Opel's motorsport director and one of the winning drivers, Volker Streichek. Streichek, a former DTM champion, was overjoyed with his team's success. Nürburgring was the Opel team's maiden factory-backed attempt at an endurance race, and it's the first time a new-style DTM motorcar has won the event. For Opel fans and the team, the trophy, the champagne and the celebrations were well earned after a grueling day and night of racing. The NASCAR season's already 1/3 gone, and the 13th round was a 400-lap race at Dover's Monster Mile. The first yellow flag came out after just 2 laps. Casey Mears got into trouble and hit the outside wall in turn 4. As he cut back down to the bottom of the track, the cars behind got caught up in the slowdown, and Tony Raines, Ward Burton, Mike Skinner and Jeff Green all got tangled up in the mess.
Looked like Junior may have got in the back of Skinner as they came around.
Then, just past the midway point of the race, Jack Sprague crashed hard into the wall on turn 4. And again, the slowdown affected a number of other cars, including Brett Bodine, Kyle Petty and Kurt Busch. The caution lasted for 7 laps.
Brett Bodine, Kyle Petty, and that stuff is...
Jimmy Johnson also hit the wall, hard, after he spun on an oil slick on lap 277.
Steve Burns.
Don't even mention me.
But with 12 laps to go, Casey Mears had his second crash of the day and brought out the final of 9 cautions during the race. Ryan Newman's Dodge led 162 of the 400 laps, and he went on to take the checkered flag and $200,000 in the $4.7 million race. Newman beat the Chevy of Jeff Gordon by 0.834 of a second. Newman had to drive without power steering for nearly the entire second half of the race. "I'm definitely tired," he said. "My arms hurt, my back hurts, and I'll be really sore tomorrow."
Last year, this group got their season headed in the right direction. We
go to Barcelona in Spain for the second round of this year's Porsche Super Cup. the world's fastest international one-make series, now in its 11th year as support to the Formula One World Championship. 11 rounds make up the 2003 racing calendar, 10 in Europe, with the final at Indianapolis in the USA. One of the guest drivers was Milka Duno of Venezuela. Klaus Graf raced in the American Le Mans Series last year. The ex-Formula 3 driver had his first outing in Super Cup in Spain and set the third best time in qualifying.
With these cars in qualifying, it's very important that you straight away do a very quick lap time. And so I don't think I used the potential of the car to 110%, which you have to do in qualifying. And under the circumstances, I'm pleased with the lap and I'm pleased with the result, so I'm looking forward to the race.
Frank Stippler was to claim second place on the grid, 0.15 of a second off pole. He decided to wait and see if the track would offer more grip with some rubber from the other cars laid onto the surface. This was a mistake because after a while there was a lot of dirt on the inside of the corners, which made a really fast time impossible. Conserving the tyres without losing touch would be vital. But for the second round in a row, it was his teammate, Pierre Carfer, who set the fastest time.
Difficult here, especially in Barcelona with hot weather, is to use the grip on the whole lap, because you have only your first lap with new sets of tires. After this, the peak from the tire goes down and you're slower.
The fourth fastest time went to Walter Lechner Jr. from Austria. Wolf Hensler and Alessandro Zampredi would start the 14-lap race from 5th and 6th on the grid. Milka was 18th, 5.6 seconds off the pace. And slowest was retired Spanish motorcycle ace Cito Pons, 6.1 seconds down on pole.
Barcelona is always very critical in the first corner. You get down there with a lot of speed. You'll have to be very careful and try to get a real good start if you don't want to find yourself in trouble down there.
From the start, Carfer jumped into an early lead, but there was torrid action behind him. In contrast to the hot and sunny conditions of practice, the race was in cloudy and cool conditions, meaning the tyre wear was less likely to be critical than had been expected. Rookie Porsche driver Graf was battling to hold off Wolf Hensler, but Graf wasn't about to give up his place willingly. Double world motorcycle champion Cito Pons was an early retirement. Meanwhile, Luca Riccatelli barged his way past fellow Italian Alessandro Zampredi and Australian Alex Davison. Graf and Hensler were still battling each other for track position. With Lechner holding off 4-time champion Patrick Huisman, on lap 7, an overly confident passing attempt by Riccatelli puts the Hollander into the sand trap, where he lost over a lap on the pack before he got going again. Eventually, Hensler found a way past Graf on the 7th lap, although the newcomer to Super Cup wouldn't let go and harried Wolf to the final lap. From the 9th lap, Hensler had Steppler's second place in his sights and closed right up, with Graf tagging along behind. Frank would later admit that his car's setup was too aggressive for the tyres and they deteriorated too fast, and he was glad to see the checked flag. Hensler said that as Graf got closer, he was both trying to get past Stippler and keep Graf behind him. With a green light to checkered flag victory, pole sitter Pierre Carfo claimed the second round of the Super Cup. He previously won the season opening round at Imola and drove to a clear victory nearly 4 seconds ahead of his teammate Stippler. With his second win in a row, Carfo extends his lead in the drivers' standings, while Luca Riccatelli sits 10 points in arrears in second, ahead of Wolf Hensler and Walter Lechner Jr.
Yesterday in the qualifying I saved 1 new set of tire. I think I was the only one that could do that. So I know in the first couple of laps I must push to get a gap to my opponent Stippler. So and then to a little bit speed off to carry the whole race. So it was a fantastic race. I'm happy. Thanks to the team. They did a perfect job.
Riccatelli was 5th, ahead of Alex Davison and Lechner. Zampredi, second last year, was 8th. Thousands of Valentino Rossi fans turned out on a sultry day to welcome him back for the first practice for his only race of the year in his home country. Rossi's the only man to have won races in each class at Mugello. In 1997, he won the 125s. In 1999, he captured the 250 title. And last year, he claimed the MotoGP trophy. Max Biaggi launched a late assault on series leader Rossi, who had led comfortably throughout the session. Biaggi fell just a fraction of a second short through the final section and had to settle for 3rd place. Sete Gibernau continued his good form on the factory Honda and completed the provisional front row in 4th. But Loris Capirossi made a last-ditch effort for provisional pole position for his first ever home Grand Prix, riding the Ducati Desmosedici and edging out Honda pair Rossi and Biaggi. Capirossi also set himself up for the weekend's other big prize, the all-time speed record. His 328.9 kilometers an hour made the Desmosedici the fastest motorcycle in MotoGP history, with 2 more days to go faster. Manuel Poggiali copied Loris in the first qualifying session for the 250cc race, pulling out a last-lap effort to dislodge Randy Depunier from provisional pole at the end of a session dominated by the Frenchman. Depunier crashed and was unable to defend top spot, leaving the San Marino rider to establish an early advantage for his home race, with Fonzi Nieto posting a late effort to go second. Depunier's attempt to stay on pole found the point where 10/10ths effort reaches 101% of available grip, and gravity takes over. Tony Elias, winner of the previous 2 Grand Prix, suffered this heavy crash in the morning free practice and was unable to match the 4 fastest riders, although he did go better in the second half of the session to clock the 5th fastest time. Yuichi Wii took the provisional 125 pole position, holding onto the top spot by 0.086 of a second after a late attack by Australian teenager Casey Stoner, who faded on the final lap as he struggled to cope with the heat. However, the 17-year-old was happy with second place. Wii scored his only podium of 2002 at the Italian Grand Prix, and that was his most recent podium too. But when the final session came, Rossi's brilliance shone through as the king of Mugello saved his best till last. The 4-time world champion was initially second fastest behind fellow Italian Loris Capirossi, who appeared to have pole position in his grasp with just seconds remaining in the session. But Rossi, despite touching the grass on the final turn and despite being shadowed by Capirossi's teammate Troy Bayliss, eclipsed Capirossi by less than 3/100ths of a second, taking pole position for the 3rd year. Capirossi couldn't improve on his time from the previous day, but it was still good enough for second place on the grid, sending Ducati fans into raptures. Japan's Shinya Nakano was 3rd fastest on a Yamaha. Nakano, who won the 250 Grand Prix at Mugello in 2000, has scored points at every race so far this year. This was his first front row start since he qualified second in Germany last year, riding the 2-stroke Yamaha. Max Biaggi claimed 4th place. With his teammate Toru Okawa 5th and just a 10th of a second slower than Rossi, this is the closest top 5 qualifiers ever in the Premier class. Randy Depunier took the 4th pole position of his 250 career after an intense battle with the championship leader Poggiali. The Aprilia pair duelled throughout the session, setting lap times that put them apart. Fonzi Nieto was 3rd, but his best time was over a second slower than Depunier's pole record, with Poggiali a quarter of a second behind the Frenchman. Casey Stoner took his maiden Grand Prix pole for the 125cc race. Provisional pole holder Wee was one of several riders who failed to improve their times in the searing temperatures, but Stoner scorched to a new pole record, despite never having raced a 125 here before. Wee crashed heavily on Saturday and was unable to match the 7 faster riders who leapfrogged ahead of him in the final session. It was Capirossi who set the pace from the outset with a blistering start from 2nd on the grid to take the early lead, setting both the fastest lap and the top speed of 332.4 kilometers an hour. Despite high hopes, Yamaha's Brazilian Alex Barros had a short race, a sudden crash and an early trip to the Italian beach. Rossi and Biaggi set up a 3-way Italian challenge, and Capirossi conceded the lead to Max Biaggi on the 5th lap before, 2 laps later, he was passed by Rossi. Biaggi was in great form, but on the 14th lap, Rossi drifted out of the slipstream of the Ducati at the end of the straight to lead. His 2 challengers maintained the pressure, but the world champion held his nerve to win by 1.4 seconds. Makoto Tamada was 4th, ahead of compatriot Shinja Nakano. Rossi, as ever, was gracious in victory.
For sure, it's something special. Win here at Mugello in front of all that crowd is very difficult to explain. And also, I think all the crowd is funny, is happy because we are 3 in front and 3 on the podium, and we make a good fight for all the race. I make my congratulations to Loris and Max because today are very fast, and it's very difficult to arrive in front. When I go in front in the last laps, I see on the board Capirossi arrive, but I try to stay concentrated and keep my rhythm, and at the end I win. So I'm very happy.
With 115 points this season, Rossi is streets ahead of arch-rival Biaggi, and despite repeated brilliant showings, Capirossi is only 7th on 36 points. In the 250 race, Poggiali, Depunier and Fonzi Nieto left the rest of the field behind, but Nieto dropped back. Depunier slid off on the 14th lap, but rejoined until, with 3 laps to go, he crashed again and was unable to restart. Momo Poggiali took his 3rd victory of the season in the 250 race, cantering to the line with a 22-second advantage over Fonzi Nieto. Franco Bertani inherited 3rd from Depunier and could have gone 2nd with another lap or 2 to catch the Spaniard. Poggiali's victory moves him 19 points clear of Rolfo, 4th at Mugello, at the top of the standings, and Depunier pays heavily for failing to score. Lucio Cecchinello led for most of the 125 race, with 10 riders swapping positions. Pole sitter Casey Stoner was on track for 2nd, but the Australian teenager was wiped out by Steve Yenkner on the final lap, gifting Daniel Pedrosa the place. Pablo Nieto also kept his head in the frenetic finale to seal 3rd place, repeating his podium finish from last season. Cecchinello took an emotional first victory on home soil to move level on points with championship leader Pedrosa. Andrea Dovizioso now lies 3rd in the title after taking 4th place at Mugello. So, even if the action gets too close for comfort and nothing seems to be going where you point it, make sure you catch next week's Drive.